Sega's NAOMI arcade board is responsible for some of the very best games on the Dreamcast. Throughout the life of the system, Sega and several big name third party developers released their latest and greatest games on both the arcade and Sega's latest console. And while the NAOMI boasted a faster Power VR2 GPU as well as additional VRAM, the Dreamcast ports were near indistinguishable. Crazy Taxi, Virtua Tennis, House of the Dead 2, Power Stone, 18-wheeler, Ferrari F355 and Dead or Alive 2 all made their way to Dreamcast faithfully, impressing gamers with their visuals and unique gameplay. When Dreamcast was discontinued in March of 2001, NAOMI remained an affordable and powerful option for many arcade developers who continue to release games not just in the arcade but on Dreamcast, especially in Japan. It's highly likely that had Dreamcast remained commercially viable, many of these games would have come to the West. However, the NAOMI helped breathe life into Dreamcast as late as 2007. I'm James, the SEGAHolic, one half of the Sega guys, and in this episode I'm going to show you the insane quality of the Dreamcast's NAOMI arcade afterlife. These games will be shown in release date order, and we kick things off with a double release on September 13th, 2001. Capcom vs SNK 2 Millionaire Fighting 2001 kicks things off, featuring a wealth of game modes and characters. Players choose from one of 6 grooves or playing styles, each of which are modelled on previous Capcom or SNK games, including Street Fighter 03, Street Fighter 3, King of Fighters 98 and Samurai Showdown. Game modes include your standard arcade mode, an unlockable boss battle mode and survival mode. Upon completing the game, you unlock Groove Edit mode, allowing players to mix elements of different groove types and save them to their VMU for use in other modes. Arcade mode itself is split into 3. Ratio match, where players select up to 3 characters and give each a ratio up to the value of 4, with strength altered according to the number of players. 3 vs 3 mode, an elimination style match with each character having a ratio value of 1, and single match, where players choose one fighter assigned a ratio of 2, fighting in the traditional best 2 out of 3 bouts format. The entire roster of fighters from the previous game, Capcom vs SNK Millennium Fight 2000, returns in full, with 5 new Capcom characters making an appearance. Eagle returns for the first time since the original Street Fighter, with Rival Schools Kyosuke Kagami, Street Fighter 3's Yun and Final Fights Rolento and Maki rounding off the Capcom side. SNK-wise, Athena Asamiya and Chang Kohan along with Chao Bunj are added from King of Fighters. Rock Howard comes in from Garou Mark of the Wolves, while Hibiki Takane is added from The Last Blade 2. The final SNK edition is Art of Fighting's Ryohaku Todo. With crisp, detailed visuals, responsive controls, modes aplenty, a huge roster of iconic fighters and various gameplay styles, this was one hell of a release and remains one of the best beat-em-ups on the system, if not all time. Next up, and also releasing on September 13th 2001, is Sega Rosso's Cosmic Smash. Best described as Pong meets Breakout mixed with squash, Cosmic Smash takes players on a journey through various stages in a subway-style system, with each level acting as a stop on the route. After completing stage 777, the path on the route forks, allowing the player to go left or right, forging their own path through the stages. The more the player deviates from the standard route, the greater their score can be, with the game ending when the player runs out of time. Stages in Cosmic Smash start off relatively easy, but increase in complexity quite quickly. Piles of blocks, moving obstacles and stationary panels require trick smashes that utilise the walls, floors and ceiling to bounce the ball back at blocks quickly, clearing stages faster. When you make it to the end of the route, and provided you finished at least 8 stages with a trick shot, you'll take part in a bonus stage. The game at this point advises you to switch off your cell phone and have fun, before you face a blue version of your character that is defending 2 blocks you need to destroy in order to complete the game. Cosmic Smash has one of the most stylish game cases on the Dreamcast. coming in a translucent DVD style case as opposed to the traditional CD dual case. And unless you were still fully invested in the Dreamcast import scene back in the day, there's every chance that Cosmic Smash's existence passed you by. Any Dreamcast magazines in the UK had long ceased printing by the time Cosmic Smash arrived. However, there was an import review in the December 2001 issue of Edge, who scored it 6 out of 10 in a review barely spanning 5 paragraphs. Cosmic Smash is a stylish yet simple game with a level structure perfectly suited to the arcade. But with no real extra game modes on the Dreamcast, this was one truly for the arcade enthusiast. Virtua Tennis 2 is the only game on this list which came to the UK, releasing in late November of 2001, 1 week after its Japanese release, but a full month after hitting shelves in North America under the name Sega Sports Tennis 2K2. The original Virtua Tennis remains one of the greatest tennis games ever made, perfectly blending fantastic physics, shot variation, real-life players and iconic tennis arenas with that pure Sega arcade gameplay and a brilliantly cheesy rock soundtrack. Virtua Tennis 2 expands on the roster of the first game quite considerably, with Jim Courier, Mark Philippoussis and Thomas Johansson making way for Patrick Rafter, Thomas Engqvist and Magnus Norman. The biggest change, however, is the addition of a full women's roster, including the legendary Williams sisters Venus and Serena, Lindsay Davenport, Monica Seles and Arantxa Sanchez Vicario. Gameplay wise, players can now slice shots during play, with the World Tour mode receiving a major overhaul compared to the first game. World Tour mode is what sets the Dreamcast port aside from the arcade version, adding incredible depth way beyond arcade mode. In Virtua Tennis 2, players must train a male and female player in tandem, allowing them to compete in singles and mixed doubles matches. Visually, Virtua Tennis 2 is a real treat. The first game was no slouch in the graphics department, although back in the day there were criticisms of the player's zombie-like sunken eyes. Personally, this never bothered me, but Virtua Tennis 2 does have more detailed facial features and improved animation on the player models, who seem far better proportioned compared to their counterparts in the first game. The series would live on well beyond the Dreamcast, and I recently got to enjoy 2011's Virtua Tennis 4 at the Arcade Club in Bury, filmed here by Dan the Mega Driver, as the series continued its tradition of including the best players in the world, with Roger Federer, Andy Murray, Novak Djokovic, Rafa Nadal and Maria Sharapova in the roster. Virtua Tennis 2 received critical acclaim when released, with positive reviews across the board in all regions, and it remains one of the best sports games on the console to this day. Treasure graced the Sega Saturn with one of the best shooters ever made in the form of Radiant Silvergun, which ran on Sega's Titan video board based on the Saturn's architecture. It's almost fitting then that Ikaruga, the spiritual successor to Radiant Silvergun, runs on the NAOMI board, releasing on Dreamcast in Japan on September 5th, 2002. Ikaruga's gameplay focuses on a polarity-based colour system. Your ship features 2 forms, black and white, activated by a single button press which sees your ship flip around to change colour. Enemy swarms come in black and white colours also, and your ship can only be destroyed when hit by a bullet from an enemy of the opposite colour. Bullets of the same colour are absorbed and power up your homing laser, while shooting enemies with bullets of the opposite colour dishes out double damage. The result is a frantic but almost strategic shooter, as you frequently change colour to switch between double damage shots and absorbing enemy bullets to charge your homing laser ahead of facing the boss. Speaking of bosses, they include elements of both colour types that must be destroyed before the boss itself can be hurt, and they also fire a mixture of black and white bullets in true bullet hell fashion. Development of Ikaruga took almost 2 years, undertaken by a small team within Treasure with the aid of team members from G-Rev, who took the job under contract in order to raise funds for the development of their own game, Border Down. Due to the lack of a Western Dreamcast release, Ikaruga gained popularity amongst importers, in yet another similarity with Radiant Silvergun on Saturn. G-Rev's Border Down was released in Japanese arcades in April 2003, with the Dreamcast port hitting shelves on September 25th that same year. Border Down's story is typical sci-fi shooter stuff. Aliens have attacked a human colony on another planet, in this case Mars, and you must pilot a ship to come to the rescue. However, the twist here is that the craft you're piloting is unmanned, being controlled remotely by the pilot. Gameplay in Border Down consists of 3 parallel stages or borders of differing difficulty levels. You begin on the easiest border, which is green in colour, and as you lose a life you border down, moving down to yellow and ultimately red. Lose a life on the final border and it's game over. There's no continues here, you're straight back to the start, although continues can be unlocked with repeated play. Sales of Border Down exceeded both G-Rev and Sega's expectations, with both the standard edition and a limited edition containing the soundtrack selling well, leading to an extended print run of the standard edition. Given that G-Rev had contracted staff to other companies to raise funds to create Border Down, there was huge pressure on its release. Producer Hiroyuki Maruyama was ready to fold the company if Border Down failed. It's an eerily similar story to that of Tecmo, who were saved by Dead or Alive running on Sega's Model 2 hardware, and without NAOMI and the Dreamcast, who knows what fate would have befallen G-Rev. Border Down, quite rightly, is a favourite amongst Dreamcast gamers and collectors to this day. Puyo Pop Fever, aka Puyo Puyo Fever, released in arcades in November 2003 before coming to Dreamcast in February the following year. Gameplay is the same as previous Puyo Puyo titles, taking place on a 6x12 board where players place coloured blobs, aka Puyos, with the aim to group 4 together in the same colour, removing them from play. As you pop Puyos, you send trash to the rival player's board, which falls on them should they fail to make a chain. Unlike previous games, Puyos can fall in groups of 3 as well as 4, and the addition of the Fever bar allows players to counter-attack trash sent by their opponent, creating a massive chain. Puyo Pop Fever is the second Puyo game developed by Sonic Team, following Sega's acquisition of the series' character rights when original developer Compile went bankrupt in 1998. And while the game never seen a Dreamcast release outside of Japan, it did come to practically every other platform. PS2, GameCube, OG Xbox, PC, PSP and Game Boy Advance. Puyo Pop Fever has a special place in Dreamcast history, as it's the final first-party game ever released on the system. Taito's Trizeal, released on April 7th, 2005, is a top-down bullet hell shooter in which players take control of a transforming craft. The weapons fired by your ship depend on its current form, with homing lasers, standard bullets and rockets to choose from. Switching weapons is a must in order to succeed, and in some ways feels similar to Ikaruga, where you switch between black and white forms to take down certain enemy types. Trizeal contains 6 stages of increasing difficulty, with the final stage hosting 2 boss battles. The game contains 2 unlockable game modes. The first, named Omake, features shorter levels with denser bullet patterns, while the second is called Lifting Mode, that requires players to juggle a stone on your ship to score bonus points between waves of enemies on a stationary stage. Trizeal was also released on PlayStation 2 a year after its Dreamcast debut, and was ported to Windows in 2016 under the name Trizeal Remix. In October 2023, community translation guru Derek Pascarella, aka A-Team, released his English patch for Trizeal on Dreamcast, which also includes several quality of life improvements, such as an English VMU save icon and an in-game button combination to toggle unlimited continues on and off. While not the biggest release on this list, it's an enjoyable shooter that fans of the genre will absolutely enjoy. In June of 2006, developer G-Rev returned with Under Defeat, a military-themed top-down shooter that sees players take on the role of an attack helicopter, covering 5 stages. As with most top-down shooters, the player has various shot types and bombs at their disposal, with enemy waves taking the form of tanks, gunships and rival helicopters. Under Defeat utilises 3D visuals viewed at a slight angle, giving a greater sense of depth to the stages. Your helicopter is locked to the position it's firing, and players must cease fire in order to change the direction they are facing. It's certainly not the most exciting of shooters, and it feels very old school in its design. In many ways, the game reminds me more of a 3D remake of something like Swiv, rather than something totally original. In the marketing for Under Defeat, G-Rev boasted that the game would be the final release ever on the Dreamcast, and the game's packaging even includes the same claim. In reality, 2 further games would release on Dreamcast the following year. On February 22nd, 2007, Warashi released the penultimate Dreamcast game, Triggerheart Exelica. Taking on the role of Exelica or Crueltear, this is yet another top-down shooter with a sci-fi setting, as you battle the evil Vermith, who have followed the Triggerheart sisters through a portal to Earth. As you defeat waves of enemies, gold chips are released which when collected rack up your score. They're similar to the gold stars in the likes of Dodonpachi. The Dreamcast version features a story mode and a range mode, further extending the basic arcade experience, with a range mode increasing the difficulty level and offering no continues. The Triggerheart members have different attack types. Exelica has wider firing patterns, slower movement and a slower anchor traction. Crueltear has a more concentrated front-facing fire, moves faster, and her anchor has quicker traction than Exelica. Anchor, I hear you ask? Yep, both characters can fire their anchor to hook onto enemies, holding them as a shield to absorb damage. Triggerheart Exelica would go on to be released on PlayStation 2 and Xbox 360. And finally, the last ever official release on the Sega Dreamcast, Milestone's Karous, released on March 8, 2007, 3024 days on from that excitement of the Japanese Dreamcast launch. The thing that makes Milestone shooters stand out is of course those cel-shaded graphics, which look okay for the most part. Some of the stage areas do look a little rough, but gameplay wise this is a solid if basic shooter that clearly takes influence from some of the biggest shooters down the years. Your ship is equipped with 3 attack types, one assigned to A, B and X. A shoots, B uses your laser sword, and X uses a bomb which acts as a shield, covering the player with a protective barrier that absorbs all incoming attacks while damaging enemies caught within the radius of the barrier. Enemies killed by the barrier drop more experience icons than those killed with either the shot or the sword. The sword attack is interesting because in both execution and feel it resembles Radiant Silvergun's Radiant Sword and is just as effective. Karous closely resembles Milestone's 2005 shooter Raidergy, which was omitted from this video due to Karous having more historical relevance, being Dreamcast's final official release. In Karous, your shot, sword and shield are upgraded by collecting experience icons dropped by defeated enemies, and your barrier bomb attack can only be utilised when the gauge is full. You can also combine attacks, using the shot and sword at the same time for further damage. Karous is a charming if uninspiring end to the Dreamcast's official software run, although if you want to try this one out on your GDEMU or emulator, there's an English translated version available thanks to Sega Sky, which also adds several improvements including the removal of slowdown and adding 60Hz for PAL consoles. So there we have it, 10 games that came to Dreamcast via the Sega NAOMI arcade board, months and even years following the console's official discontinuation. From big name arcade titles to more niche shooters, it's great to see that, in Japan at least, the system lived on. Much was made about Dreamcast being able to replicate Model 3 when it was first unveiled, but Sega's decision to base Model 3's successor on the Dreamcast architecture was something of a masterstroke. Not only was it cheaper to manufacture, but it was cheaper to develop for and gave Dreamcast access to near one-to-one ports of the latest arcade games, which could be ready in a matter of months. If you've made it to the end, thank you as always for watching. Let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on the Dreamcast NAOMI legacy. Are there any NAOMI games, and there's a lot of them, that you wish had got a port to the Dreamcast? This has been James, the SEGAHolic, one half of the Sega guys, and until next time we will see you on the Sega side.
Winner!